Hey, hi, hello. Welcome to episode 67 of Trail Society, produced by Free Trail. I'm Corrine Malcolm.
And I'm Keely Henninger.
And Keely will be joining us, or Keely, man, I don't know. 8 a.m. We're doing great. We're not editing. We're just going to keep rolling. Hillary will be joining us here in a little bit. She's on another call. Keely, I get to see you in like a couple days. We're recording this ahead of Black Canyon, but I get to like hug you in the desert. But how does that long range forecast look on your end?
I mean, I'm okay with the weather. I was going to start doing sauna training, but no need to do that.
No, I'm bringing like rain pants and two down jackets.
Exactly. I think my race looks like it's getting a little warmer on Sunday, but it's still like the high is 60 in Phoenix. So like the high in Black Canyon City will be probably 55, 54.
Oh, yeah.
So not too worried about it. The rain will be fun. If the trails are sloppy, then bring it on, because that's all I run in. So
yeah. Have we talked about you running the 60K? I feel like we've talked about you pacing Rachel Drake, who we had on last episode.
Yeah, I guess not.
Yeah,
I'm racing the 60K.
Jumping in.
So long story short, I wasn't going to race the 60K, but I got into U of A medical school, and they actually have a student's day on Monday.
Oh, sick.
Day. And so I was like looking at the calendar and I was like, oh, Jay, we should go back for the race and then just go down to Tucson. And that's a way to like make it back to Arizona.
Tucson was number 3 on our residency list.
It's high on my list just because I love Tucson. So anyways, but it'll be cool to go down there with him. But yeah, then I was like, well, I guess I could just race the 60K if I'm going to be there, kind of as a nice little rust buster, just because all I'd been doing all winter was a lot of slogging. So I've been kind of getting some turnover back, which is fun. And I love this race. Like, it's so fun. And it looks like there's some fun people racing, at least from what JT's told me.
I love that JT knows who's racing. That's so cute.
He just follows everyone on Instagram. He's like, hey, do you know so-and-so's going to Arizona? And I'm like, no, cool.
No, cool. I think there's a bunch of people who are crewing or helping with the live broadcast or helping on Saturday. And then are running the 60K. Yeah, so Leah's going to be in the field all day, freezing her butt off on Saturday, doing commentary.
Sounds like we're all kind of treating it the same. It's like I'm pacing Rachel for 10 or 11 miles and then racing the 60K. So it's like my goal is to run Chuckanut. And so this is more like a fun race. And I don't know if you feel this way, but I feel like I do a lot of races where all my pressure's on myself to win. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, I must do my best. And I think this year, some of my goals is just to race a little bit more of shorter stuff, to be okay not like having to run from the front or run my hardest race every single race. Because I think when you only race 3 times a year, it's really easy to get tied up in the pressure of being like, well, this race is only my second race of the year. It must be the best race ever. And sometimes in trail running, that doesn't work. So like, I think just racing a little bit more, but having less pressure and just like running to get more racing miles and being comfortable being out there, kind of the goal for at least the beginning of the season.
I think that's super smart. And I'm a person, you know this about me. I'm a huge proponent of going and getting my like ass just absolutely handed to me at races, which is not for everyone. Not everyone loves that, as particularly on like the elite side of things. But I love like sticking my nose in places where maybe it shouldn't be, like going to Lake Sonoma 50 mile as a tune-up race, right? Like, or Black Canyon 100K as a tune-up race where it's not my big race for the season. That was like leading into Western states or something. And it just was like, yeah, like my plan is that I'm not peaked here. I'm not like, my expectations are like, I'm going to put up a good fight, but it's like, I might be 3rd, I might be 12th, and like, it doesn't really matter. And so I think it's cool growth for athletes to like mix it up like that.
Yeah. And it's not common in our sport, even though in my mind it should be. Like if you look at track runners, most of them will do a lot of track races in the season to tune up for like the Olympic trials or the Olympics. And they go into those races knowing they're not going to run their PR, not even close, right? And we go into these races, most of our races, at least my mindset, and I know a lot of other people's mindset, is going into these big races like, oh, I got to win this one, then I got to win the next one. And it's like, even crazier in our sport, because it's like we're racing 50K. So like, no, it can't be that every single race we're just on.
Yeah.
And so I had that epiphany the other day while I was talking to my friend, and I'm like, oh, I mean, yeah, there should be more races that just don't matter as much, and then some that can matter more. So it's kind of my thought.
Yeah, I think there's different ways to do that. It could be local races, but personally for me, the local races are almost more stressful because it's like, oh, I'm the pro locally. Like I should beat everyone. And it's like, no. Like we have a lot of local heavy hitters who are very much unsponsored and very much could be world dominant type of thing. So it's, to each their own. You guys, we have such great news. We have an official title sponsor. This podcast is presented by The Feed, which is, I think, is a cool development for us. Like we've been working with The Feed for a long time. But yeah, now we get to say officially, The Feed is our title sponsor, and we are so gosh darn excited. And to celebrate, I just ordered double cookies and cream waffles because there were some left. And I would encourage everyone to go do the same. Hi, good morning, Hilly. We're just talking about how The Feed is our new title sponsor officially.
And I'm muted. I'm so happy. I'm so excited about it.
So to kind of in that vein, I mean, I'm really excited. I'm a nutrition agnostic human being. So it's like I've got precision hydration fuel. I've got some like weird spring matcha stuff coming in. I've got chews from who knows where. And obviously my first love in life, waffles. Don't tell Stephen and Petey I said that, but waffles are pretty high on the loves of my life list right now. And you too can experience the loves of my life by going to www.thefeed.com/Trail Society. And there you will get a $15 credit quarterly to use, we think. And that might change over the course of the year, but right now, $15 credit per quarter to use on orders from The Feed. So we just wanted to give an extra big lovey shout out to our friends over there.
Yeah, and one of my athletes is very anti-gel. So they've only tried a couple, but they like basically had a bad experience with them. So what they've started doing is The Feed has like these ultimate tryout packs and like different little gel hodgepodges where they put together like all the best-selling gels into one pack and then send you that, and you get to try like literally one of everything. And they've actually had a ton of success with that because they've never known about some of these other brands, and like a lot of these gels are different. And so if you're one of those people where you're like, hey, Goo's not for me or Martin's not for me or whatever, there's a lot of ways to just try out a bunch of different stuff. And a lot of my athletes have been trying that out recently because some of them just don't love certain gels, and they're like, oh, I didn't even know this brand had a gel, and now I can try this one and see if I like that too. So it's been pretty cool.
Yeah, they have so many different things, but something maybe Corrine you'll add to your love list is Fresh. It's like homemade cookies. I think I've talked about this here before. It's so good. I actually just ordered a few. They have like, I'm not a double chocolate kind of person, but they have one of those like a brownie, and then they have like a fresh baked cookie. They're in these like vacuum sealed things. So I like put it in my bibs for riding, and it warms it up. Or like running, it's really good too. So it's like that's a nice alternative if you don't want to have gels, because I don't always love those for runs too. So
yeah, so we'll be working with them all year long. We've got some fun stuff cooking up in the works. Actually, our really good friend Corrine Chalvoy is working for The Feed now. So Corrine have joined forces, and we're joining forces on a bunch of stuff this year, including a bunch of live commentary. So the Corrines are going to dominate. But again, if you want to try anything from The Feed, go over to www.thefeed.com/Trail Society. Doing so shows a lot of support for us as well, keeping this whole thing off the ground. I think we're going to switch into some news, and the news is kind of short, and I don't want to say sweet, but it is just to kind of give folks an update on my end. There's been a bunch of meetings this week. It's only Tuesday, so I don't know how that works, but there's been a bunch of meetings this week with UTMB, the PTRA, Killian and Zach, et cetera. Actually, a bunch of brand managers also met with a number of invested parties at UTMB as well. I just got a text from my brand manager, or like the head of global marketing for Adidas Terex this morning about that meeting. And so these are things that have been slowly in the works, but then were expedited by the leaked email from Killian and Zach that was leaked on Instagram by a British running coach. But it was an interesting meeting. I would not say there's anything settled yet, but I do think all invested parties really do want, I can't say everything because we haven't talked to Ironman yet, and they are on our list of people to talk to because Ironman does own 45% of the company. I think the Pilates own 55% / UTMB owns 55%, and Ironman Group owns 45%. So we need to talk to the new CEO at Ironman as well. But a lot of people do want things to go in a positive direction. But the meeting yesterday was 2 hours long. It was occasionally brutal, occasionally discouraging, and periodically optimistic. So I would say that there's probably nothing that's going to change in the immediate term, the short term. This was a very long, winding meeting with lots of questions thrown out, not by the PTRA board, but by any PTRA members could be on the call, which I think was really cool for the Pilates to hear from many people, not just the people that they interact with the most. And I would say too, I think that most of us really like the Pilates, have no like ill will against Catherine and Michelle, but that the way the organization is running, the way it's growing really quickly, the way it is moving into certain sectors by basically saying, Ironman, you're a North American company, do whatever you want, is kind of what happened here. And the disconnect in the communication between Ironman and UTMB was a bigger whoopsie than UTMB and the Pilates realized. And so they're currently kind of working on mending some of those fences, bridges. I'm not sure what you burn and what you mend. But that is currently what's going on. So I want to say that, it's very much not a settled deal. It's very much not over. And I don't know exactly what will happen. I do think Stephen and I talked about this, and then I'll end my rant here shortly. But Stephen and I were talking about this, about how, if you want to be the best football player, I'm talking American football, but you don't like the NFL, you still are going to play in the Super Bowl, right? Like that's still the pinnacle of your sport. If you're a U.S. biathlete or a European biathlete and you have a problem with the IBU, the International Biathlon Union, you still have to compete in the IBU World Cup. And so in trail and ultra running, we're not quite in a position where UTMB is or has to be the pinnacle of the sport, but it could be. And maybe it should be, but we're in a position where they are not the end all be all entity. They're not our national governing body. They don't own the sport. And so unlike the NFL, unlike the IBU, unlike international track and field, unlike, X, Y, or Z organization, this is a moment in time where both the public, so you all listening at home, elite athletes, brands, can say something, can have a conversation with UTMB, with Ironman, et cetera, to help steer the ship in a way that hopefully benefits their business, hopefully benefits the regular folk, hopefully benefits the elite athletes, hopefully benefits the environment, et cetera. So we're not stuck. We're not stuck yet.
Yeah.
We could be stuck, and that's okay. Yeah. That's an okay outcome, but it could be better. Mm-hmm. And that's where I come from. It could be better. And I think it's okay to love something and want it to succeed and also criticize it semi-intensely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's helpful and important that you mentioned the brands have a responsibility to speak up, because I do think that while we are not governed by UTMB, a lot of brands make it a mandatory race where you have to go if you want to get your salary. And so I think it's hard to say it's not a pinnacle when sometimes it's actually in the contract with a brand to be hey, we expect you to be at this race.
Yeah. And brands aren't 100% happy with UTMB either. UTMB has tried to put some other stuff into play for 2024 that the brands actually said, no, we're not going to do that because it didn't benefit the brands. It didn't benefit the athletes. It benefited the race org. And so I do think that it is kind of this weird vicious cycle where brands are putting that in our contracts, and yet brands aren't happy with the situation either.
Right. Yeah.
And so it's a big old work in progress.
Yeah. And like anything, it's we should always question it, right? Things can always be better.
Yeah. What do you got, Hillary?
No, there's just one thing too. It's another really cool thing about the ultra running community is that it's not just driven by elites and brands. It's driven by participation and your money can talk about which races that you want to go to, right? So it's so I think there's also that really cool thing. I mean, I know that in particular UTMB this year had a ton of entries, a lot of wait lists, a lot of people, some people that I coach, they're going to participate in the UTMB races as well, right? But there is that other piece too, right? So I think it's important for listeners to participate in the conversation as well. It's not just up to the elite end of the sport to shape it. Other people have a voice as well.
Yeah. And I've got athletes that will go to UTMB and athletes that won't. And I've been asked by my athletes and random athletes. I've gotten DMs on Instagram, my coaching email, and LinkedIn of all places of people being hey, Corrine, what do you think? And I'm at the end of the day, you have to do, here's how I'm looking at it. Here's what the conversations I'm having with my athletes. And at the end of the day, you have to make the decision that makes you feel good, makes you sleep at night, makes you happy, et cetera. And so for some of my athletes, that's been yeah, I've been working for this for 4 years. I'm going to go. And for some of my athletes, it's been like, you know what? Like, actually, I'm going to go do Ultra Trail Monte Rosa. I've got 2 athletes doing Ultra Trail Monte Rosa, which is like so cool and so exciting. So I think it's like very much, I've got one athlete that was like, you know what? I think I'm going to cash in on like being pregnant this time around. And so it's like, everyone's got a slightly different approach to it. And I think that's okay. And like, it's one of those things akin to like the pandemic and things changing quickly all over the world, but at different rates and at different times. What was okay in North America wasn't okay in Europe or wasn't okay in Asia or what vice versa. And so I think that we've got a little bit of that too, where it's like, I've got athletes who are going to UTMB, but come July might bail and do something else. Or I've got athletes who are, you know, signed up and are like hoping that they go, but have an alternative in mind, et cetera. So we'll be there most every step of the way, but that is the current lay of the land. And then there will be more there'll be more small meetings about specific topics, because yesterday's meeting was like absolutely insane. It covered a little bit of everything and also like a lot of nothing. And so there will be more targeted meetings to hopefully bring clarity to very specific issues. Largely, it's like communication and transparency.
And I have one in Boulder next
more
week.
Talking. Yeah. Next steps is more talking, it turns out.
Exactly.
But yeah, and I've talked to like John Ray and some other folks who like love these events, but also like, have some feelings and opinions. And I think those need to be shared with the wider organization. So keep doing what you're doing, folks. It's slowly working, I think. Okay, we're going to spur things on to results. And this is being recorded ahead of Black Canyon. It will come out after Black Canyon. So there'll be another race recap show where we'll talk about everything that we saw happen out there. Hopefully share some stories from the trails with you all. So today we're going to largely focus our results on the absolutely insane Olympic trials marathon race that happened this past weekend. I woke up just in time to watch like the men kick off and the women kick off at 7 a.m. Pacific, 10 a.m. out in Florida. And I was in tears by the end of it.
It was amazing. I caught the last hour. I was like running because I can't deal with just the whole thing. I needed to just watch the second half of it. But
it was good.
Yeah,
it was good from beginning to end.
Yeah, it was so good. I mean, and so there's like a group watch party at Scratch Labs Cafe here in Boulder. So it was awesome. There's a ton of people there, and it was so cool to watch. There was a lot of surprises.
Super, super cool. Well, a lot of surprises and a lot of like, I think the men's race.
The men's race
exactly what we
surprises.
Thought. No.
Well, I was surprised that the Brooks guy, the Zach, was leading the whole way, but until the last bit.
That was really, really cool. Keely, you pulled some numbers about starters in the women's field, and I would just like love to go over those before we dive into quick race results from that event.
Yeah, so just a quick backup. One thing that I missed that I'm kicking myself for is that in Portland, the sports bra had a viewing party.
Oh,
that was our opportunity.
I know. And they were partnered with Oiselle and Bras for Sports Bras for Girls. And it sold out though, which is freaking sweet for the sports bra.
So cool.
I didn't get to go, but it sold out. It was packed. I heard it was a great time. So I will keep my eyes open. I don't know how I missed it, but I was like, man, this is kind of my job to see these things. And I missed that one. So fail. But yeah, so I pulled some numbers because we're all stat nerds over here. And basically back when they announced the Olympic trials or the new Olympic marathon qualifying time of 2:37, we ran a lot of numbers. So for those of you who don't remember, back in 2020, they had increased the qualification time to 2 hours and 45 minutes. That resulted in 450 women starting the trials in 2020, which was a ginormous increase, right?
It was so cool.
Yeah. And so when they dropped the time from 2:45 to 2:37, we were kind of like analyzing it back about a year ago, saying like, okay, well, what will that look like for qualifiers? Because if we crunched the numbers from 2020, we had decided that only 90 women had ran the standard then. And so we were like, okay, well, what does that look like for the start line in 2024? It ended up being that 174 women qualified. So an additional 84 women, qualified on top of that 90 who had the standard in 2020. So people did really rise to the occasion, which is awesome. 149 women actually ended up starting the trials, and then 117 finished, which is a decent attrition rate. But again, it was in Orlando. It was very hot and humid. training for that in February is tough for a lot of people, especially the humidity.
85% humidity.
Yeah.
Which is like, I think temps were warm, but they weren't crazy. But when you add 85% humidity to the mix and like direct sun, like you could see them trying to hit the shade on the course, and it was not going to work for long.
I'm just thinking about like slip and slide skin, like in Thailand, it was awful.
Yeah. And then the cool thing about this year, though, is although there were less starters and less finishers than 2020, the field was more representative of runners of color than any past year. So again,
12% of the
baby
field
steps. Yeah, baby steps, but it's cool that it is drawing maybe a little bit more of a diverse crowd. Again, so many more steps to go, but just one data point in this, which made me interested in that. So pretty cool.
Yeah. And then I think we can kind of just like announce the team. The team is really cool. The team for women is Fiona O'Keefe in her debut marathon, which we'll talk more about in a second. Emily Sisson, who came in with probably the most pressure of anyone. She's the she's not the reigning Olympic trials champion. She missed the team actually for the marathon in 2020 and made it on the 10K. So she is a former Olympian, but she is the American record holder in the marathon. So I think it was kind of like Emily Sisson's race to lose, which is like a lot of pressure. And then Dakota Lindworm, Minnesota gal, was third and ran a stellar time. And then actually what I thought was really cool was Jess Tun McLean, who finished fourth, is unsponsored, ran a 4-minute PR, and she hadn't come in with that sub 226 time. And so we'll talk more about this in a second, but basically she had to run that in order to make the team. And it was really cool. Like now she is an alternate. Like she's officially she's qualified to be the Olympic alternate. She's like, I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm just going to train my butt off and be ready for August if they need me.
The cool thing about her is she lives in Phoenix. So it's like, maybe that helped her training.
Yeah. She ran such a stellar race.
Yeah. Super cool.
But we had a listener who wrote in and asked how Fiona O'Keefe qualified for trials since she had not yet run a marathon. And Hilly, I think, responded to her and said, hey, there's actually one other way.
Yeah, it's actually kind of cool. And Corrine, you can say if I don't know if it's, it's in here. So basically you can qualify for the Olympic trials to compete in the Olympic trials with a half marathon time. So that's what Fiona O'Keefe qualified, just to participate and show up on the start line. So she ran a 107.20 something for a half.
Yeah. Which is the fastest debut half, the fastest women's American debut half as well, I think.
Yeah. She had to run under 112 to qualify. And a lot of people think that the half marathon time is actually harder, like historically. Yeah. Particularly from that 2:45. The old time was the harder standard to meet. But that's like Molly Seidel, who was a bronze medalist in Tokyo. She ran her debut marathon at Olympic trials as well. 4 years ago. So it's like there's a precedent for this. She was joined by the likes of, I think Jenny Simpson was there off of a half marathon time. Natasha Rogers was there off of a half marathon time. So it is a way in to trials for a lot of athletes.
That's how Jim Walmsley got in 2020.
Yep. Exactly. Good old Jim.
But there's the thing too. So Fiona, in order to actually, even if she won the trials, she would have had to then also go sub 226 to make the Olympic standard qualifying time. So she did that with a stellar race in a very 2:22:10 or 2:22.
The record for U.S. Olympic trials for women.
So she made double history with the super fast debut half, then an incredible
the fastest debut marathon for an American woman too.
Definitely. So that's how she got in. So she not only won it, but she met the standard. So
and she's only 25.
Yep.
Yeah. And supposedly though she's been told since she was a kid that she'd be a better marathon runner than a track athlete or a 10K athlete. And I think
she was saying that too about the last lap of a 10K. She's like, I just don't have that speed.
Yeah. You're like, okay. You negative split your debut marathon.
Gross in that weather. I'm just watching her. It was just like,
it was 111, 110. She ran so fast. And then the other note of that is that historically, to make the U.S. women's team, you've got to run about a 225 or faster. So in theory, unless it was an outrageous year, the women who made the team, who made the top three, would make the standard, which is great.
Right. But it's crazy about the time. If you look back at, in particular, Des Linden posted something with Brooks about their place and their time. And she's ran she ran really fast this year, but her place was like 11.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so like the whole field is just getting so much faster.
It was tight.
Even
like,
though
so
the conditions
cool.
were so bad. It's crazy.
Yeah.
It was super tight through that women's like top 15. Like they were just like bodies were just falling across the line.
Oh, I know.
Yeah, it was more complicated on the men's side of things because we only had opened up 2 spots due to the current Olympic qualifying standard of needing to be under a 2:08. And actually, we had a 3rd spot until the Houston Marathon when another runner from another country bumped Galen Rupp out of the top 60 ranked men in the world or something. It's a confusing system that I don't completely understand. So we had lost a spot just like a couple of weeks ago, actually.
Yeah.
We knew that there was a chance of us we knew we'd have 2 spots. We'd maybe have 3 spots. We currently have 2 spots. It's possible that we can open up a spot still between now and Paris. I don't completely understand that, but someone will figure it out for us.
Someone has to run
weird.
sub 2:18. That's what has
and
to
it's
happen.
just someone. It's not like the guy who got 3rd has
Exactly.
to, right?
Someone has to run
2:08. Sorry, not 2:18. 2:08. Yeah. So
Yeah.
exactly. And then the third guy at the trials can go. It's just to like unlock the position.
Yeah. So it's like CJ Albertson. CJ, where are you? I know that you only finished 5th only. It was an amazing run for CJ. He like fought back to finish 5th. It was very, very cool to see.
So cool.
We'll just send CJ and someone else because that man recovers faster than anyone we know. We just need to go have him snipe a 2:07:35 somewhere. If anyone can do it, CJ Albertson can do it. We're looking to you, bud. But on the men's side, less surprises, I think. All eyes were on the former BYU runners, teammates, Mormon dads, Connor Mance and Clayton Young. Like, holy cow, all their pre-race interviews were just like so funny. And like the hype around these 2 guys was just like building in this like really all-American kind of way. It was just like very, very cute.
Did you guys see the high fives that they like did on like, there was one, I forget who he like put it. Yeah. It's just so cool.
Yeah, they were having a great time. And then I also really love that Clayton Young gave a lot of shout outs to Zach Panning after the race, being like, he did this, he did this. He's responsible for like putting together a really good race. Like we were bummed to see him fade to 6th. And again, and then Zach posted some photo of him running as like a middle schooler. And he was like, never say never. And he's just this like prototypical, like little middle school guy, just like slogging it out. It was really, really cool to see. But it's just like, the men put together an exceptionally cool race led by Zach, who ultimately finished in 6th, because he needed they're like, we need the time. We have to go under 2:08. Like someone's got to push this time forward. And when Clayton and Connor ultimately passed him, when they saw that he was struggling around mile 20, they're like, hey, like stick with us, like get on us, stick with us. Like you have to stay with us. Like we're going to do this. And I've got like chills thinking about it. And Zach did, like he stuck for as long as he could before he ultimately fell off the back a little bit. It was cool. It really felt like Clayton kind of just like opened up his arms and let Connor cross the line for him, which is like they both made the team. I don't think Clayton cared about the 15K. That will go to Connor's family instead. Because that was, I think, the prize differential between the 2. And then
I feel like there's a lot of like there's a lot of messages on social media that are like, oh, I bet they split the difference. Like they were just like figuring it out together. So it's just funny. It's so funny.
It's very, very funny. But
that was the deal that they made with the high five.
Yeah, exactly.
Sealed the deal.
Yeah, I mean, what would have they done if they had tied? I don't know. And I think it's people like, we wanted a sprint. And I'm like, I don't know. Their story is like so very beautiful, I think, that like a sprint finish between the 2 of them would almost have felt weird.
Yeah.
Like they're just training homies. Like they like take care of each other's kids. Like it's a whole situation. I can't imagine one of them like elbowing the other guy out of the way. So
and it's like Clayton has won against Connor a lot as well. So it's almost like they go back and forth a lot in terms of like Clayton wins this championship and then Connor wins this. And so it's like,
Yeah, it felt very wholesome and the video is amazing. If you haven't seen the video, it's all over the internet, like the final stretch, and it's just really, really cool. And then very cool story, Leonard Career ultimately comes from behind a bit to finish 3rd. There are 2 Army dudes duking it out. And what was really cool is that Leonard is 40 years old. Whoa. And he finished 4th 4 years ago. So he missed the team by 1 spot 4 years ago. And so they asked him, they're like, hey, like we might not have a 3rd spot. Like, how are you feeling? And he's like, it doesn't matter. I finished 3rd this time around, which is great. Like I moved up a spot. Like he's like, if I go, I go. If I don't, it's okay. And I was just like, that's such a like unique position to be in, being like, yeah, if it works, it works. But it was, I hope we unlock a third spot, because getting the 40-year-old Leonard Courier to the Olympics in the marathon would be pretty freaking cool.
Yeah, totally.
And then we have to give some trail shout outs. CJ Albertson ran to 5th. John Aziz, who's been on the U.S. short distance trail team, ran to 38th. Tyler McCandless and Zach Cornelius they finished basically together in 103 and 104. Christian Allen did not finish, I believe. I don't know if he started. I could not find him on the results list, so I'm assuming he was a DNF. Des Linden finished 11th at 40 years old, I believe.
Faith Olympic trials. It's insane.
It's so cool. Someone who we didn't shout out, who's not a trail athlete, but could be, Sarah Hall. Join the dark side. We're waiting for you. Ran her her 10th Olympic trials, finishing 5th.
Yeah.
Which I think is her best Olympic trials finish.
She Masters
set
record
the Masters
too.
record, yeah.
She's what a baller. I just love that entire family. I want them to adopt me as well. Peyton Thomas, who is a former guest of ours. If you haven't listened to that episode, go back and find it, because Peyton is a gem of a human being. Ran another 2:36, finishing 41st, and then Catherine Floor finished 50th. So those are the folks that have a trail or ultra inclination who we'd like to come dabble more. Actually, Peyton gave this really cute interview afterwards, and she's like, I'm really excited that I don't have to run another marathon for 3 years. She's like, I'm coming back to the trails, and then I won't have to run a marathon for 3 more years, and then I'll run it again to try to qualify for the next trial. So I thought that was very, very cute. Peyton, we're big old fans. Okay, the last bit of this is kind of racing / news. And that was that USA Track and Field announced their 2024 national championship calendar, which is interesting. I'm just going to run through it. The 100-mile road national champs is coming up February 16th at the Jackpot Ultra in Nevada. March 10th is the 50K road champs at Calumet in New York. Mad City, and these are kind of classic races that happen over and over again, particularly on the road side of things. Mad City 100K in Madison, Wisconsin on April 20th will be the 100K road national champs. Loon Mountain will host the vertical mountain running national championship. Again, really, really cool race. I ran it back in 2012, I want to say, and it was awesome. And then new for the first time ever, which I think is really freaking cool, is that the Cirque Series in Snowbird, Utah, got the mountain running national championship. So up-down format, which heck yeah, the Cirque Series runs such a cool bunch of events. That's a big deal for them. Keely highlighted a maybe fan favorite, race favorite, the Tamalpa Headlands 50K in California. They held the 50K champs this past year as well, but August 17th. Do you have anything to add to that? You gonna go? You gonna be there?
No, I just love that it's in the Headlands. I want there to be a rebirth in North Face, and to me, this feels a little bit like that.
Yeah. So Jeff Stern is the race director.
And Jeff is the race director, who's my homie.
It's a race that's existed for a long time, but Jeff kind of brought it back post-pandemic. It had kind of gone the way of the dodo bird. And I think he collaboratively a little bit with Daybreak are hosting the 28K version of it in September, which is part of the Golden Trail World Series, which is so
super cool.
Sick, very, very cool. And then my hometown, Hayward, Wisconsin, is hosting the Marathon Trail Championships in September at the Berkey Trail Run Festival. They've hosted the half marathon champs before, but they haven't hosted the marathon champs. If you want to run a 26-mile cross-country race, this is it. It's on ski trail predominantly. I think they intersect a bunch of single track as well, which I spent my high school years building. But it's a cool race. It's basically a long cross-country race. Tussey, which was Keely's first ultra, the Tussey Mountain Back 50 mile, will host the 50-mile road national championships in October, which is mostly dirt road, isn't it? So got a lot of dirt road in it.
It's not much paved, maybe 2 miles. Yeah, it's all dirt road.
Then it sounds like it's an amazing. I mean, Devin's run it. I've had athletes run it. If you like faster stuff and you're inclined to maybe try a 50-mile race, or you're more comfortable on the roads, it'd be a good 50-mile step up.
And it's a relay, so you literally can see your crew and other people all the time. So you never really have too many down moments where you're lonely, because people drive by and cheer for you the whole time.
That's cool. Very sick. I know Devin's gone out to it. It sounds like a really cool race.
Moab.
I say Moab Trail Half Marathon is going to host the Half Marathon Trail Champs in November. They've hosted it a bunch. Another great race. And then Dirt Circus, which hosted a 10K for the first time this past year in Arkansas, is going to host the 10K National Champs in November. A Dirt Circus is like in conjunction with Ultra Sign Up. It's a cool, they're trying something really cool and novel, and we'll see how it does. And then finally, the 24-hour National Champs is at Fat Ox in Arizona, November 23rd. And I believe that all now can be found on the USA Track and Field website or the American Trail Running Association website. So I don't know, go try something. Particularly our Masters athletes, you can win a Masters National Championships. And I think they start Masters age groups at like 35. So like everyone's getting a championship title this year.
Sarah Hall, come over.
Come join us. Okay. Now we're going to do something really fun. I keep standing further away from my mic when I do this. Today, for our meat and potatoes, we're going to do something called Fact or Fiction. And if you have read my I Run Far columns, I started adding in something periodically called a Fact or Fiction piece, where we dig into a set of trail myths. And these were things that I heard whispered at trailheads or passed around at group runs or on questionable podcasts sometimes. And it's not that they are incorrect or wrong all the time, but it's kind of like you hear it and you think like, did I hear that right? Is that accurate? Or it just sounds kind of silly. And when you dig into it, it's either true or it's not. And so we each brought a myth to the table today to talk about. And I'll kick things off. And the myth that I chose was, you only need one downhill session to, quote, season your quads. And, is that true or is it not? And what does that look like? And so we're each going to, like, as we go through this, like, I'm going to set it up and ask Keely and Hillary a couple questions. And we're going to talk a little bit about how we maybe put some of these things into practice. And then we'll just kind of continue on from there. And maybe you hate this format and you can let us know, but we wanted to try something a little bit different today. So my myth is, you only need one downhill session to season your quads. And this comes up because I think when I'm working with athletes, we think a lot about, we're worried about the uphills. We're worried about getting enough vert. We're worried about, how do we fit that into our week or our long runs? And then every year I will have athletes worry about the downhill. And for example, I have 5 guys running Western States this year. Don't know how that happened, but I'm really excited about it. And it's a net downhill 100-mile race. And so every season, every year when I've got athletes coming into this race, they look at it, they come from flatter environments sometimes, and they are worried about their quads blowing up. They are worried about surviving the downhills and being able to run well late into the race. And so, how do we season the quads to get them ready? And I'm wondering, just a little bit from the two of you, have you heard this fear from your athletes? Has this been a concern brought up to you guys?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially for athletes that don't necessarily have access to the trails, or they don't think it's enough, right? Most of their runs, especially during the week, will be on the road, or they don't, their hills are small compared to a race in the Pacific Northwest or, Colorado. So,
whoops. It's because I've been coughing. I think that I've dealt with this myself, and then I've also had a lot of athletes deal with it. And I'm on the board or the bandwagon that this is definitely a myth in my mind. But I'm intrigued to hear what you think, because I've had a race where I've done probably one pretty hard downhill effort, and my quads still blew up during that race.
Yeah. So what does the science say, right? And I think that the biggest part of the science is talking about how do you do this safely? How do you do this effectively, and how do you do it safely? And I think as coaches, our job is to think about dose response and what is the smallest possible dose that elicits results. And again, there's variability within individuals. Physiology does not operate in black and white. There are shades of gray. We see a study that says, this didn't work for, 6 of the 10 participants. Well, it worked for 4 of them. We should explore that type of thing. So much of ultra running training is repetitive in nature, right? But it's overwhelmingly safe. You build up your miles, you build up your vert, you build up your time on feet. But when it comes to downhill running and the specific neuromuscular and musculoskeletal demands of it, if we attack that in a super aggressive, repetitive manner, we might end up injured instead of on the start line. And so it's again, when you're working with athletes, it's what is the balance there between getting some of that repetition and not having them maimed before their race? And part of why that's so tricky is that the demands of running downhill vary super wide, like vary a ton from running uphill or running on flat surfaces, i.e. running uphill is more concentric muscle demands, and then while running downhill is more eccentric muscle demands. And I'm wondering, this is like bio 101, biomechanics 101, kinesiology 102, which I struggled in kinesiology because I couldn't understand how joints moved in space very well. What do you guys know about eccentric muscle contractions?
I mean,
because I mix them up all the time.
Yeah, me too.
I mean, it's when a muscle is elongated, which I feel like is kind of counterintuitive. But it's typically elongated when it's activated and actually under tension. So like this is obviously evident when you're running downhill because you can like kind of see the quad of the leg, the lead leg envision. Downhill is like longer, right? Because you're leading out with it. And so it's extended, and so that it's like slowing you down. And so when it's extended, those muscles are elongated because they're under tension to actually slow you from moving down. So
gravity, baby.
Yeah. So that's where you can get all that muscle damage because it's holding that tension for a very long time.
And I've always like, for tendon work, I've always associated like the eccentric work is to strengthen those, and like that they respond fairly quickly to it. I was dealing with some Achilles tendonitis, and like doing some like eccentric kind of work in the gym is something that helped me there. But yeah, like kind of forcing it, like not going out and running on it, but doing some focus work there. But yeah, I always get them confused because it's like eccentric. I would think it's like more like shorter, but no, it's like the length when the muscle is fully along.
Yeah, and you'll forever mix those up. But I like I like thinking about that lead leg visualization because you're not in that flexed position, you're in an extended leg position, but there's still a ton of tension being produced across that muscle. And so there's this thing called the repeated bout effect, which got a confusing name because in my head, when I hear repeated bout effect, I think we got to do this thing a lot. We got to do this thing over and over and over and over again. And that's a repeated bout. And that's how we get better. But actually, in the scientific literature, which we know the scientific literature is super good at naming things, like in non-confusing, very straightforward ways, that the repeated bout effect, it actually refers to this phenomenon where a single novel bout of exercise, generally eccentric in nature, causes an adaptation that protects against future muscle damage, i.e., one bout protects you long-term in the next bout. And so, Keely, you just mentioned that you've tried to do this one bout, and then your quads still fell apart. Or we're coming out of spring and you've done that first big long, every year at Montana State, we do our first like mountain run of the season with the ski team, and we'd bomb down from the top of Bridger, down from the M. And I was running with all these Alaskans. If you know Alaskans, they're like insanely good at running downhill. And I would not be able to walk for like 4 days afterwards. My quads felt better the next time around, type of thing. And I'm wondering if you guys have any other experiences with that kind of like one bout effect, maybe positive or negative. It sounds like Keely's got some mixed feelings about the repeated bout.
I've had more of a similar experience to Corrine. Like I remember the first like mountain run, like coming back from injury, I was like, ouch. Like it wasn't even that long of a downhill.
Coming down Tam after recovering from a pelvic stress fracture. I was like getting down to a toilet position was not my friend for a couple of days.
But for me, it always seems like it's obviously, well, in this, you guys can weigh in, but it's the steeper the downhill, the more of the effect I have on this. And it's like, even if I'm running fast, like on a more gradual, like downhill road, it seems like the effect is a lot more pronounced if it's a steeper trail.
Yeah. There's some like, we'll talk about this research in a second, but there's some like limitations to the research, which might be important for listeners. There's this group out of University of Calgary in Alberta, and Guillaume Millet is like, I don't know, science icon here. He's a very, very smart man. They've put out a number of papers kind of all based around one study, looking at repeated bout effects. But essentially they had, and it was like, once again, physiology research is funny. There's 11 men involved in the study. So only male athletes, fairly small sample size, et cetera. They brought them into the lab and they had them do a 30-minute controlled downhill run. So they're at negative 20% grade, which is fairly steep, I will say. Negative 20% is a steep grade, running about 9:30-minute mile pace on it. The volunteers were measured again. So they came in, they did that study. post that one study at 24, 48, 72, 96, and 168 hours, they measured neuromuscular fatigue, flat ground running, biomechanics, and running economy. 3 weeks later, they came in and did the same thing. They did another 30-minute study, and then again, 24, 48, 72, 96, and 168 hours post downhill session. They measured those things. And what they found was that muscle soreness, neural fatigue, and maximal voluntary force production were improved after the second downhill run, i.e., there was some sort of protective adaptation that happened after run 1, so that when they did run 2, those measures at 24, 48, 72, 96, and 168 hours, quote unquote, improved. Mm-hmm. Kind of like their limitations of 1, sample size of 11, all male athletes, a 30-minute control. Lab experiments are always going to be, they have to be controlled, right? So that you have to set some sort of parameter, like long enough to hopefully make them soar, but not so long there's other things at play, et cetera. So basically it was like, there seems to be a repeated bout effect here that works. We don't know how long it works for. Again, this was only 3 weeks between the two trials. So we could say it probably works for 3 weeks, this type of stimulus. But again, it's going to be individual. And so I think there's something to be said for like how I would take this, like what I would take away from this as like an athlete or as a coach is that like, you probably don't need to go do a million downhill sessions to get ready for your race that has downhill, particularly non-technical downhill running. You got a big technical race, you're in sky running, you need technical exposure. If you're doing Western states, you probably don't need to be doing a once a week or twice a week downhill stimulus, but some targeted runs where you do push downhill a little bit more is probably all you need. Is it going to be one bout? I'd say probably not, but you also have to not do so many bouts that you hurt yourself. So we're walking a fine line of getting some eccentric muscle load, which you could probably add stuff like gym work in to try to balance that out, and an occasional effort that includes some downhill muscle damage. Any thoughts, takeaways? Keely's like, we're going to go back to the lab and we're going to add this variable and that variable, and we're going to bring 60 people in and be 30 men and 30 women. And we're going to make sure the women are all in this part of their cycle. Like kind of where's your head at right now?
I mean, I think that, yeah, to your point, this is one study on some men with a 3-week break in between. I think that for sure the 3 weeks is interesting to me because when I had my quads blow up, my downhill run was definitely longer than that from the race. So like trying to make sure you have that stimulus, not sure when it should be, but yeah, I think we just need more studies. I think a field study would be really, really cool too, because I think
Dog Mountain,
a lot of the
baby.
times, yeah. And a lot of the times we're running these downhills in a really long effort. And again, to my previous point, like what does that look like? Mm-hmm. Like what is all of that other stress that's going on? How does that impact muscle soreness and all of that? It'd be very interesting. But yeah, this is not super surprising to me.
Yay. Kelly, what about you? You're muted. We're really good at this today.
Thanks. I was just saying that the repeated bout, like that is the part that's really interesting to me too, is like, okay, figuring out where that is. And of course, there's probably be a lot of variables from person to person, but also from male to female, and then the length of the running that you're doing. So yeah, but I mean, I think
everyone has a 30-minute negative 20% downhill in their backyard. That's very specific. That's a little bit hard to find.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Cool. Well, that was my myth, and I think it's largely fact with a little bit of it depends.
I like it.
Mm-hmm. That's my conclusion. Okay.
Which might be the answer to all of these.
It depends is our favorite type of answer. Okay. Yeah. Hillary, I really liked yours, and I'm really excited to talk through it with you. So what myth did you bring to the table today?
Of course, I chose one about mental toughness. So my myth is to be truly mentally tough, I must push through pain and discomfort all of the time. That's what being tough is. Let's go.
David Goggins, who's going to carry the boat?
Yeah.
Stay hard.
No, exactly. So not to like, whatever. If you love David Goggins, cool, it's fine. But like, I think that's where this came from. It's kind of, I don't know, maybe it's like an outdated view of like mental toughness and what toughness is in general. This idea that you have to like train it out of you, this whole like boot camp, like military thing, like let's go do repeats in the rain, or like, not wear a shirt when it's freaking cold outside, and, just make things tougher than they need to be to basically like train this toughness into you or out of you, or, like that whole mentality. Yeah, so I'm curious what you guys think about this. If that's something that your athletes bring to you, if it's something that, you're prescribing to your athletes of like doing a long run. And I don't know, it might be some cruel form of torture if you're like forcing your athletes to, wear sweats when they're training for ultra distances, but this is maybe Western prep. But
I mean, there are coaches who like very like into like intentionally kind of preach some of this stuff. Like, I want you to blister your feet. Like, I want you to run in wet shoes. And I'm just like, oh, okay. Like, honestly, like most of my athletes are parents and work busy jobs. And I think like getting out of your car at the trailhead shows mental toughness. I think like getting your run in after you put the kids down for the night on your treadmill shows mental toughness. And so my kind of boat, like, or my boat that I'm carrying with David Goggins here is a lot less about like life presents us with moments of discomfort and life presents us with moments of like quote unquote mental toughness. And it's like just getting by sometimes, I think, is like, and reminding athletes of that when I'm like, oh no, you like got this thing in after the dog ran away and like your kid is sick, etc. Like in my mind, that is natural growth and we don't need to force it, I guess is my take. Keely, what about you?
No, I agree. I think like I talk about this a lot and we talk a lot about this a lot on the podcast is like there's not a one size fits all for mental toughness. And I don't think that there's a threshold at which like you're really tough or you're not really tough. I think it comes in all forms and we can practice it all the time. But again, within reason, like we don't need to go crazy all of the time and be detrimental to our health, because there's a level of mental toughness that's required and there's a level that's just unnecessary in my mind.
Yeah, and this is like something that, I mean, obviously I'm passionate about, and we've talked about on the podcast before too, like many times, is this like death or DNF kind of mentality. And I think that kind of fits into it. And so when I was curious, and so I'll like kind of just one study kind of going over this, because there's been more studies about this hot topic of mental toughness and how exactly to measure this kind of like this box that we don't know what's inside of it. And so there was a specific, we'll link it to the show notes, all like these articles, but there's a specific study.
The Canadians, man.
At Canada. I know, these guys, let's go. But Bernard Thom, Frédéric Guay, and Christine Trottier, let's see if I say this right, from Quebec region. But they're from the University of Laval in Canada, and they presented this updated model to explain what toughness is and actually how to improve it. And so this study kind of goes through, they create this kind of test where they're testing mental toughness from cyclists. And they discover that mental toughness is a finite resource. And they kind of break it down. It consists of basically, they say 3 resources. So challenging goals, so something that's hard to achieve. So basically in their test, they have a little like an FTP test. And in one group of cyclists, they, the screen, which like cyclists like go off of power numbers, it goes black. And then they have to complete this FTP test, like hitting a certain power without like the data input, right? So they found that some athletes panic, some don't. The control study was just like kind of a regular test like that. So it's a challenging task to begin with. And then they discovered that these 3 resources for your basically that consistent mental toughness, a challenging goal, self-efficacy, which is basically they describe as self-belief, it's like a fancy type of self-belief that you can learn through various means, and then self-control. So it's basically to resist unhelpful impulses. Like this can be like internally or externally. And so these obviously can influence they've like trying to determine things that are measurable that can influence your performance. And they found that athletes that exhibited more kind of resilience or these things they measured in mental toughness had more of these like resources. And so, yeah, but the key point in this study was that they actually showed that there's things that you can work on to improve your mental toughness. So it's like, if you're saying that, I think it's different than this other model of like, okay, this David Goggins thing, you either have it or you don't. You have athletes that like survive the boot camp or they don't, right? But this is more like, okay, well, if you're in a more welcoming environment, it's like, and this is a tough situation, then you learn things in this tough situation so that the next time you're presented with the challenge, you can actually improve upon your performance and do better. I think the main thing that I talk about my athletes with this is like that self belief. Like, how do you actually what are these ways that you can actually like talk to yourself and like improve these ways to actually to get a better performance out of you, instead of like immediately, like when your screen goes black on your test, to tell yourself, oh, like I'm not going to do this. Like the athletes that perform better on like basically achieving their FTP score, like and passing that test, so to speak, were able to have more self-efficacy and kind of problem solve their way through it. Yeah. So that's kind of, it's not a perfect study. There's definitely a lot of variables, because it all deals with, personal, like if someone already had like coming into this as an athlete, like they're already maybe better at like doing self-belief talk and things like this. So it's not absolutely like perfect, but I think it actually raises an interesting point that this is something that's more taught and a process driven thing than you either have it or you don't.
Yeah, and self-efficacy is super interesting. There's like a ton of studies that have come out just around that kind of terminology that are basically like this like super fancy type of self-belief that you like, it is learned, right? And it's not just learned by doing things, it's actually even like learned by watching a peer or a mentor do things, like can boost your own self-efficacy. So it's like your belief in the ability to accomplish a task, essentially.
Right.
Like it's this very specific thing, but it's really cool. I think it's a really interesting model for maybe what's moving away from mental toughness and is moving towards what I've like deemed, there's a post-it note on my computer that says this, where it says that psychological flexibility is greater than mental toughness. And like in my mind, that this study, the book that you link from Steve Magnus, Do Hard Things, et cetera, like really speak to this idea of like psychological flexibility being kind of like the end goal of taking on challenges, of being put in stressful situations, of going into your race and being able to handle the hiccups, et cetera, like comes down to this like flexibility component.
As opposed to this whole idea of like, I think the whole, David Goggins kind of approach, or that boot camp training, is like stacking the odds against you. So it almost feels like the point of it is for you to fail instead of learn different strategies to be able to cope. And I think in this paper, they talked about certain things that can influence your performance, but 4 things that you can work on. And that's like your attention, effort, perseverance, and like these certain strategies. And they kind of, it's interesting to kind of go more into it. There's a lot of, vagueness, I think, in those mechanisms, but still, I think, if you're interested in the topic, it's cool to kind of go a little bit deeper into the paper. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But I guess like on the flip side, like we're in a sport where it's going to be super painful, and oftentimes we're going to have a lot of discomfort. And so like, how do you balance that with your athletes?
Yeah, this is a great question. Well, I mean, I think it's like what Corrine said, like starting this out. It's like even like getting out of the car, like doing these things, like problem solving throughout the day. Like if your day goes to crap and then you're having to problem solve like where you're going to fit training in, or you didn't have a good night of sleep, it's like adjusting. Like all of these things can be deemed as mental toughness. It's like, I think communicating to your athletes, like those are the little, I say, problem solving strategies that you can use in a race, like relating it back to moments in time where things are hard, that when things get hard during a race, that you can kind of tap in on those strategies that you use to kind of to push forward.
Yeah. So I guess the question is it fact, fiction, or something in between?
Something in between.
Yeah. I think the old like try to make you fail is probably on the way out. And there's some more new age skills on the horizon for most athletes in the sport.
Yeah.
Sweet. Keely, your myth was exactly what I thought it was going to be. You want to introduce your topic?
We're going to make it a speedy one.
Oh, you got this.
So mine is pretty predictable per Corrine's comment. Mine is that not getting your period means you are training hard enough, which anybody who knows me probably nodding along right now, being like, yeah, that makes total sense. I understand why Corrine predicted that one. But I just don't think we can emphasize this enough. And it still shocks me to this day how many athletes I interact with on a daily basis who still think this is true. Regardless of how we think the field's progressing, there's still this narrative lingering around and still rearing its ugly head in how some people fuel and treat their body. So want to nip it in the butt one more time.
At least one more time, probably more than one more time.
More than one time.
Yeah.
So not getting your period means you are training hard enough. Were you ladies ever fed this narrative or experienced this narrative firsthand?
I wasn't fed this narrative specifically. I was fed oh, you don't have your period. It's because you're an endurance athlete. Like, so it wasn't the like, oh, you're doing good. You're doing good, kid, pat on the back. It was more like, it was normalized just because you were an athletic girl or an athletic teen or an athletic woman or an athletic person who gets their period, that you were like, it was normal to not have one. So I didn't get the like gold star, no period for you, but I got oh yeah, no, that's just normal. Like get on some birth control, which I know we'll talk about here in a second.
Totally. Same for me.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of where it came from, right? It's come from years and years of just like abusing our bodies and being told that that's just like what happens to athletes and that's normal and that's okay. Whereas we've found out recently, maybe that's not okay. And so, figuring out that this message we've been fed for a while may not be what we should follow going forward is kind of where we're going now. But I'll dive into the science just a little bit. Again, you guys are probably all relatively familiar with this, but for those of you who don't, we're going to go into it anyways. So why do we lose our menstrual cycle when we're training in the first place? So this can be lost due to high training stress, which could be a combination of the following. It could be higher intensity all of a sudden, higher duration all of a sudden, more frequent training bouts, or all of the above, paired with other stressors and paired with inadequate calories. And so typically, it's a perfect trifecta of those three. You've kind of increased all of those things and decreased the amount of energy you're intaking. And this can lead to functional hypothalamic amenorrhea, which basically just means lack of menstrual cycle due to the brain signaling the hypothalamus, which is a nice little organ in that brain that triggers a lot of cascade effects of the hormones, and that actually stops sending those hormones. So it decreases the secretion of those, which ultimately tells your body, hey, there's not enough female sex hormones circulating right now. Let's not have a baby. And so typically that results in lack of menstrual cycle for athletes. And that is what has been kind of spoken about over the years as what is quote unquote normal for athletes to experience when they're training a lot. And so do you guys have athletes who are experiencing this? And if so, how do you address this with them?
Yeah, I think what's interesting too is that this is expressed to me as like, oh, well, she's got low body fat percentage, therefore they've got low body fat percentage, therefore it's like they're not going to get their period. And like that also turns out to be kind of false too. Like you can be quote unquote very lean and still menstruate if you're adequately fueled. And so whenever I take on a new athlete who menstruates, and like I've got a lot of athletes too that are like perimenopausal and like postmenopausal, and that's like a whole nother thing that we've talked about here periodically is like there's a lot of irregularity there. But I always ask athletes too, like, hey, like what their status is essentially. Like, I feel like you're at the doctor's office and I'm like, do you know the date of your last period? And you're like, oh goodness, it wasn't last week, but it was probably the week before that. So just like talking to athletes and normalizing it. And I've predominantly had male coaches, even personally, and all of those coaches have done a really good job of just checking in with that and making sure that I'm personally in a good place. And I think that that's what it is. It's just like normalizing, having a conversation about your period and then adjusting as needed based on what each athlete's individual symptoms might be around their period, or if they don't have one, like explore why they might not have one. Like, do they have polycystic ovarian syndrome? Do they is there a reason why they don't bleed, et cetera? And like, just make sure that we're crossing our T's and dotting our I's.
Yeah. And I mean, go ahead.
No, I was just saying, it's a conversation I constantly have, it's a way to check in with the athletes, just athletes that I coach. And I've had a very good role model and predominantly male coaches who've helped me track my cycle. And then I think it's just to have these conversations and to normalize it a bit more.
Yeah. And I mean, there could be other reasons why you don't have a menstrual cycle. I think that's always important to emphasize. Some people just don't menstruate. Some people have other issues going on. That is all okay. Some people are on birth control and therefore they may have a menstrual cycle and they may not. And so I think that's one thing also to highlight is that even if you're on birth control, that doesn't necessarily mean you're okay. I think that's another myth is like, I'm on birth control, so I don't have to worry about my period. I'm just always fine. It's like, no, that could also be a red flag, is if all of a sudden you don't have your cycle and you used to get a small control bleed on the birth control. Those are all things to be worried about. And up until recently, because this was just common between athletes, practitioners used to put them on birth control, right? To control amenorrhea. Be like, oh, you don't have your cycle? We'll just give you one. We'll give you this birth control and then we'll make you bleed. And
people
that gives
still
you
do
estrogen.
this.
They still do it. And they thought it was very protective and also regenerative in terms of bone health. And recently we've found that actually it can be used sort of as a Band-Aid, whereas it will maybe preserve some bone density in some athletes, but ultimately it does not help you build back bone density or improve your bone density while on it. And so again, birth control, not necessarily a solve for this. And why it's bad is just because, when we're not menstruating normally, our body no longer is basically telling us that we don't have the energy it needs to create a child. And that is our first and foremost, like, kind of role as a female menstruating person, is to have a child. And so while this might seem super unnecessary to athletes, and again, if you don't want a child, totally fine. But while we're an athlete, we might be like, it's fine if I can't have a baby right now. There's long-term health impacts that I think we're finding out now, where we really do need to prioritize having a natural cycle if we're not on birth control. And this will help our performance. So a lot of papers are coming out now showing that amenorrheic women don't have improved performance compared to those who do have cycles, and that downstream, having amenorrhea for a sustained time can decrease bone density with up to a 2% loss every single year for every year losing your cycle. It can also impact fertility downstream, and also has its kind of like little web into all sorts of aspects of our health. Like it can impact cardiovascular health, metabolic health, our immune system. It can impact our performance. It can increase our likelihood of developing depression, and it impacts our GI distress. Like there's so many downstream impacts of having amenorrhea for a prolonged amount of time.
Do you want to hear the scariest one?
Out now. Yeah.
The scariest one is that estrogen is protective of your brain, y'all. And your brain's an expensive thing that you've like invested time and money and schooling into. And there are studies that show that estrogen is really protective of your brain, and that they are concerned that women who spent a lot of time amenorrheic are at higher risk of developing like memory issues as they age, like potentially even like earlier onset dementia, et cetera, because estrogen is protective, which is a little bit scary. Maybe that's like my little fear monger here. But yeah, it's not even like your body's trying to keep your ability to have a baby. It's like your body's job is to keep you alive. And it's like, we're going to shut down systems that we quote unquote don't need right now to try to like, it's like when you get cold, right? And like your body's like, you know what, fingers, we don't need those. We're going to constrict blood towards our core. And it's because it's your body's job is to keep you alive. It doesn't care if you lose a few fingers along the way. Its job is to keep you alive, to protect those vital organs. And the same thing happens here from a like menstruation, amenorrhea standpoint, is like, it's like, okay, we can't have a baby right now. Cool. We're just going to shut down that system so that we can keep you alive. And it's like, it's not that like, oh, you can't have a baby. It's like, oh, your body is struggling to keep you alive. And that should like matter to people beyond thinking it's going to improve your athletic performance.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Corrine rant.
I think we can all disagree that training hard enough to lose your cycle, mostly fiction, it's not normal. So while it's not 100% fiction, because everything is a gray zone, absence of a menstrual cycle for greater than 3 months is definitely a red flag for athletes. However, one missed period, while that's not, I don't think should be considered completely normal, does not necessarily mean we're in the red zone. But I think being in tune with all of that is just super, super important. And so I think, consulting your physician, if your cycle becomes irregular or absent, to find out the root cause, whether it be, red S and overtraining or something completely different, is just something that we should all do. And then, working with someone, if it is something related to overtraining, to decrease the number of exercise days you're doing per week and increase the calories you're ingesting to try to reestablish that energy balance, is just something that we all should strive to do if we are finding ourselves in that amenorrheic state due to red S or something like that.
Yeah, I consider it like a metabolic injury. Like you might not be maimed yet. Maybe you're not in a boot yet. Maybe you're not on crutches yet.
Right. We don't need to be that.
You've got a metabolic injury. You've been given the canary in the coal mine sign to like, it's like the big flashing like, like the big lights are flashing and you're like just ignoring them. You're like, red flag, I'm good. Next red flag, I'm fine. Just batting them away. So, well, you're saying mostly fiction.
Mostly fiction. We should all strive to, if we can, have a naturally occurring menstrual cycle to have that.
Yeah. Yeah. And there are many like medical reasons why someone might not have a cycle. There are many medical reasons why actually like oral birth control is like very beneficial to certain conditions like endometriosis, et cetera. So it's like there are going to be reasons to be on meds. There are going to be reasons to not be on meds, et cetera. But like being really a critical thinker about it, I think is no short-term gains. We're all about long-term health around here. You take your short-term gains and you take them somewhere else. You take them to some biohacking podcast. You're not going to get that around here.
Nope.
Okay. Well, that was Fact or Fiction. Hopefully you guys liked it. We did it. We made it through. Wide ranging. So it's kind of like a grab bag. It's like a science grab bag of us just pooping on other people's science. Okay. We're going to end things with some society slamming. And again, we asked y'all to show us your wrappers, right? We said, hey, you buying things from the feed? We're buying things from the feed. If you're not buying things from the feed, that's okay too. But are you eating on your long run? And we asked you to show us your nutrition from your long run. And people did. Like you guys ended up resharing quite a bit of stuff, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it was really cool. So keep on tagging us. We like to see it.
Yeah. And like they all were tagging the feed and showing that they ate all sorts of gels. There's precision gels, spring gels, science and sport gels. All of those things were bought off the feed and they were fueling all of our listeners through their runs. It's so sweet.
Yay. Full circle community fueling. Don't lose your periods. We should get hats that say that. Okay. Some other Society Slam stuff. I'll read the first thing because I think it's yes. And that's actually the meeting that I'm jumping into after this is with Miss Esther Chillog. Someone said we should do an episode with her. And I said I 125% agree with that statement. She is so cool and very, very amazing.
So awesome. That'll be a good one. And I'll read this one. I don't think we're going to answer it, but it's like, this can maybe be like something we cover on a future episode or maybe a future myth to bust on an episode. But we had a listener say, I'm hoping to become pregnant this year, but the doctors know very little about ultra running and believe that the stress of it impacts fertility, even though I have mostly regular cycles and I'm a mid-backpack runner. So yeah, I think this could be cool to cover in a little bit more depth in another episode. So we haven't forgotten you. Keep messaging us these questions.
Yeah. And I think doctors aren't super privy to information on ultra running because there's not much data out there. But I think, keeping your cycle in check, just like we just ranted for 15 minutes, making sure it is regular. And that even if you are a back of the pack runner, make sure you're fueling and taking care of yourself. Like all those things will definitely increases your ability to become fertile. So
yeah. And I think the other thing too is that like once you are pregnant, because this person is on their journey to becoming pregnant, is that like most of the research, while few and far between on pregnant women, because it turns out it's hard to get IRB or ethics approval to study pregnant women. It's like there's two lives here. Is that there isn't a lot of research, but generally speaking, it keeps advancing. Like the ACSM keeps coming out with new and better guidelines, most of which is that like pregnant women can do everything they were doing pre-pregnancy, essentially, as long as you feel good and things that don't hurt. But yeah, exercise all the way through. You can run, etc., until it feels uncomfortable. So we'll talk more about that at a later episode. And then this one is so similar. The last one is so similar to another one that we read recently, but I almost thought it was the same one, but it's not.
Yeah,
and I think
so
that's really cool. Keely, you want to read through that one real quick?
Sure. Yeah. Hello. Oh, hello. We say hello back. I wanted to say that I really appreciated the brief discussion about Red S and a lactating athlete. I've been breastfeeding for 1.5 years. I've been on sabbatical from training for about 2 years due to pregnancy, postpartum, and the demands of parenting. Approximately a year postpartum, when I would occasionally go on a shorter run, 5 miles or less, I would be absolutely ravenous for a day or two. Girl, I feel you. I'm not even postpartum. It probably does not help that I eat mostly plant-based diet, but regardless, it did not feel sustainable. Now that my baby's a toddler, I'm not breastfeeding nearly as often. Even so, adding high intensity activity to my routine again feels very different than it did pre-pregnancy. I feel like this is really important to emphasize. Again, super individualized. It might not be the same for everyone post-pregnancy. They continue to say, I'm doing low volume training for a 13.5 miler run. It's a lot of adjusting and a lot of uncertainty, but this podcast was a good reminder for me to make time to continue eating 2 to 3 breakfasts per day. So proud. And to be kind to my body as my sleep is often fragmented and not sufficient. Thank you for your podcast. Well, we thank you for your message.
Yeah. I love that they kind of like answered any questions they might have had along the way too,
Yeah.
in their own thing. But yeah, I know it's true. Like we hear you and we see you, and we're going to hopefully continue to bring you cool and interesting information from people in the field, from researchers, from other mother runners, from athletes, from other coaches, subspecialties, etc. So keep sending us your questions because they do spur our guest list, which is really cool. And for now, I think that's it. We'll see you post Black Canyon. Well, this will come out post Black Canyon anyway, but then we'll have another episode. There'll be more Black Canyon hype. So we love you all. And until next time, we'll see you on the trail.